Thank you, Laura, for this very kind introduction. And before I start with anything at all, I think I wanted to see Mr. Leon standing with Mr. Yannick and taking a bow, and everybody congratulating the happy. Yeah. That's what it's really about. I mean, how many times do you see in Germany, how many times do you see a mom working so hard, so soon after her child is born? So Laura is just amazing, and thank you for all the good things that you do, and it's wonderful to be at this conference. I was at this conference, I believe Valerie reminded me yesterday, 8 years ago or something, and it was not that many people, if I remember correctly. But no, the point is you have a really good value proposition. So, the numbers have just grown kind of over the years, and I think it's a testament to you as well and your hard work, and to all of you in the organizing committee for doing such a lovely thing to encourage scholarship amongst our youngsters. So I was thinking, okay, so how am I different from anything that you have seen so far? Because you've seen some sterling academics and sterling academic presentations yesterday and today, and you've seen some really, really good practitioner presentations as well, and the kind of work that goes on in practice. And if I have to define myself in this field in terms of kind of who I am, I would really say that I am an academic entrepreneur. And what do I mean by being an academic entrepreneur? I mean that I'm someone who came from practice. I came to academia from practice. I was in brand management before I started my PhD, and so I actually did my MBA from a very, very good school in India, the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad. And after I graduated, I got a job in a multinational consumer goods company, Reckitt Benckiser, that competes with Unilever and Colgate Palmolive and all of these companies worldwide. And I was very excited, and it was a good company, and I was happy to get a job. My first assignment after I joined this company was to launch a brand of toilet cleaner in the Indian market. So I was still in India at the time. Now, you can have dreams, you can have aspirations in life. I don't think you've ever gotten up in the morning and said, I want to manage a brand of toilet cleaner. I mean, this is my calling, kind of, I said, okay, well, no place to go but up from here. So I might as well put my enthusiasm and passion into toilet cleaning. I'll learn whatever there is to learn about toilet cleaning. And and this was a fantastic product. It's this plastic, blue-colored liquid coming out and all of that fancy stuff. It's the mid-1980s. Most of you in the room were probably not born at the time. But there was only one rub. The product was like 3 or 4 times as expensive as anything else that was available on the market right at the time. So I had a job to do, and my job was really to kind of understand people's psychology and attitudes towards this business of toilet cleaning, something that we don't want to think about, ever, usually. But I went about it with gusto and learned a lot, and that's when I understood that my real interest is in trying to understand human beings and trying to understand human being motivations and attitudes and behaviors in terms of why they do kind of what they do. And long story short, suffice it to say that today, so this brand of toilet cleaner I launched in India in 1985-86. It's called Harvik. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the brand Harvik. Shanker probably has. I mean, but it's the largest selling toilet cleaning brand in India today. Okay, so if nothing else goes into my obituary, I want that part to go into the obituary, into my obituary, to say, okay, this man was responsible for a lot of clean toilets in his life, and you all know the value of that. I mean, you know, sooner or later. So my break in this field, I think my PhD was in marketing, and my break in this field came when I met the CEO of this company called Ben & Jerry's. You all know Ben & Jerry's, right? They make ice cream. And I met the CEO, Ben Cohen, at a conference way back when in the mid-1990s, and he asked me a very interesting question. He said, you know, we do a lot for the environment, we do a lot for society. Can you help me understand if our social and our environmental initiatives and whatever we do in these realms, does it sell ice cream for us? You know, do people buy Ben & Jerry's because of our environmental and social performance, all else equal? I said, I do not know the answer to your question, but I am very intrigued by it, because as a marketing person, we were always thinking about sales, right? How do we increase sales? Marketing scholars obsess about that. But we always think about kind of product quality or price or promotion or all these other kinds of things, the 4 Ps, as drivers of sales. We don't think about environmental attributes and social attributes as drivers of sales, or at least we were not doing that in the mid-1990s. So I thought, okay, I mean, this is a really interesting problem, and I'll start thinking about it. As I thought about it, I realized fairly soon that the first test, or the first good way to do this, would be to conduct an experiment, you know, where you want to see whether people are reacting to these social and environmental initiatives or not. And I said, okay, well, I don't really know how to do a good experiment, so I need to find someone who's smarter than I am and who knows how to do experiments. And that's when I called upon my friend, Shanker Sen, and I said, hey, you know, there is this idea. How about we kind of try to mess around with it, dig into it, and do something? And he honestly didn't give me the time of day for about 3 years, because I approached him in 1996, and I think we started working on this in 1999. But anyway, at some point we got some papers published. And as I was working on this theme of kind of how do stakeholders react, so that was the basic question, how do stakeholders react to CSR initiatives? I was visiting companies. Procter & Gamble was a big sponsor of our research, and then, you know, there was Stonyfield Farms and General Mills and Timberland and different companies. And I was going around them and trying to talk to them, trying to understand you know, the nuances of this problem. I had one central observation, and that observation was that the sustainability manager or the CSR manager of these companies are very, very good people. They're smart, bright individuals, but at the same time, they're very lonely people. They do not have a seat at the proverbial table where decisions are being made. Important corporate decisions are being made with regard to strategy. They don't have a say. And there is no real interplay between the sustainability officer and people from HR, people from marketing, people from finance, and so on. So I was intrigued, because I always thought that sustainability ought to belong to the center of the organization. And so I said, okay, I wanted to try and find out why this is. I mean, why is this going on? So I started doing some research informally. I was doing a lot of executive education, so I always used to ask my students, I was teaching sustainability, I was okay, do you know what your company does in the sustainability realm? And most of the people in the room didn't know, still don't know. And I would say, okay, so what's going on? Why is that? Well, sustainability is important, but it's someone else's problem. I have more important things to do. I have goods to sell. I have balance sheets to balance. I have this to do, everything else. I have my own thing. We have a sustainability department. They know what they're doing. They're taking care of this. This answer left me a little dissatisfied in the sense that, I understood what the syndrome was, what the symptom was, but I realized reading the statistics of where we are headed as a species that this was not tenable. Because even today, and I'm telling you a story that's at least 5 or 6 years old of my own experience, but even today, with the last statistics that we know, carbon emissions by the world's largest companies continue to increase. They're still increasing. Despite whatever we read, they're actually increasing. Only 1/3 of the companies, of the 600 largest companies in the US, have any sustainability oversight at the board level. And it's the same with water, it's the same with waste. And so the thing is that if it's going to be left to the sustainability department, then we are not going to win this battle. There is no way we are going to win this battle. And so the research that I want to talk to you about today is that how do we make sustainability everybody's problem? First, in the organization, of course, that's the place to start, and that's going to be my setting for the most part. But then, as well, in the organization's ecosystem, right? So suppliers, community members, investors, all of these other kinds of stakeholders. And then, very importantly, given that in most households, there's one working member who's kind of in an organization of some kind or the other, there are spillover effects, right? So they would come home and talk to their children, they would talk to their wives or spouses, and maybe there would be some kind of ripple effects from that as well. So my modest goal in this next 30 minutes or so is to try to present to you a framework that I have come up with after having talked to and visited lots and lots of organizations and lots of executives on 2 basic questions. First of all, why do companies fail? Why do companies fail to take ownership of something that's so incredibly important to their well-being? It's not somebody else's well-being. The company itself is going to be irrelevant if it doesn't take care of all the social and environmental issues that's facing it. I'll spend a little bit of time on that, not too much. I'll spend most of my time on discussing what does it take for companies to take ownership so that it's not someone else's problem. Hence the title, Someone Else's Problem No More. So my data really comes from lots and lots of interviews. So I have spent the better part of the last 4 to 5 years talking to C-suite managers, several CEOs, CMOs, COOs, etc., senior managers in the organization, middle managers in the organization, shop floor employees, you name it. All kinds of organizations I have touched, non-sectoral research. So this is so I have cement, I have food, I have entertainment, I have electric utilities, chemicals, lots of different companies in different spheres. And the fun is not really going to the headquarters, because in the headquarters, things tend to be very spiffy for a company. Any company will have their best showing in their headquarters. But when you go to Madagascar, for example, to study Rio Tintos, and Madagascar is very, very far away. Or when you go to the Atacama Desert in Chile, where Enel, this electric utility company, is doing significant work in the renewable energy space, that's where you get a better flavor of what is the company's kind of real, real interest. I mean, is it just lip service, or are they really doing something to help people? How is ownership kind of translated to the common employee who's thousands and thousands of miles away from headquarters? So that's when you get the real spiel. So, and I tried to do as much as I could of that during the last 5-6 years or so. And then, of course, as Laura mentioned, starting 2011, middle of 2011, for the last 7 years, I've been running this Sustainable Business Roundtable at my school in Berlin, the European School of Management and Technology. And we have about 25 members, including Unilever and UniCredit and Siemens and Deutsche Telekom, you name it, Allianz, all of these kinds of guys. And every meeting, so it's a peer-to-peer learning network. And in every meeting, the way I design these meetings is that the sustainability manager comes with a member from another department. So I might say, okay, let's do a theme on sustainability and HR. So for that meeting, the sustainability manager of these companies come with a colleague from the HR department. And then for 24 hours or so, we just debate and discuss kind of what can HR help, how can HR help, to promote sustainability, to embed sustainability in the organization. And then the same with marketing, the same with innovation, the same with finance, etc. So I started with 0 companies in 2011, and now we have 25 companies. So each of these meetings are transcribed, the content is transcribed, and then I have to make sense out of those transcripts. So in terms of the analysis, it's basically a humongous amount of transcripts to look at. What I did was, or what I continue to do, because I continue to learn from this, it's an iterative approach, so I kind of travel back and forth between the data and my emerging theory of what it means to own kind of sustainability and sustainability own. So I'll give you a flavor of the findings from that. So the first question is, why do companies fail? If this is so important, so why is Rome burning? And I basically want to distill that into 2 easily understood factors, and I'll call them willingness to change and ability to change. Pretty much every company that I've studied would fall under one of these 2, or some mix of both of these categories. So willingness to change is basically, first thing is short-termism. Right? So the tenure of a CEO is 4 years or less, right? The average tenure. And the CEO comes in, and the CEO basically, so there's all these things, there's obviously profits and analysts' expectations and so on. And the CEO typically in a public limited company, as you know, is paid and mostly in stock and stock options and so on and so forth. So what's the CEO's incentive? The CEO's incentive is to basically say sustainability, that's someone else's problem. I want to maximize profits in the time. I want to maximize shareholder value during my time. I'll exit a rich man. We'll see what the next person does about this. Right? Now, that's a very hard problem for someone like me to solve or to address. This is where people like Larry Fink come in. And you heard, if you were there in the early afternoon presentation today by the excellent master student that we had from Laura. Oh, he's in the room. Oh, very good, okay. Talked about Larry Fink of BlackRock writing a letter to CEOs saying, you better straighten your act, you better care about the environment, you better care about society, or else we're going to pull money out of you And when Larry Fink speaks, people listen. It's $1.7 trillion invested in the marketplace. That's a hard problem, but that's other kinds of solutions. The second thing about willingness to change that I observed is that sustainability is equated to CSR in most companies and several companies. Oh, this is CSR 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever they've come up with. The point is that sustainability and CSR, of course they have overlaps, of course they have connections, but they are fundamentally two different things. Sustainability is about survival. That's what the word means, right? It's about survival. How can we make sure that we are around in the next 100 years? And sustainability or investing in sustainability works in different ways than investing in CSR. So when you talk about sustainability, if you talk about electricity, if you talk about water, if you talk about waste, reducing each of these things in your company actually adds to your bottom line because it reduces your costs. I mean, it's a much more straightforward kind of business case that one can make. But we are stuck with this notion, and that's going to take some time, like it's going to take time for our business and society to become the #1 journal in the world, which we are committed to making it happen, but these changes take time. But it is equated, it is confused, CSR and sustainability. And so CSR, well, we have people that are doing that. The idea that it embraces all parts of the organization is not there, and the strategic investments, therefore, again, are lacking. So those are the two central things that I found with regards to the lack of willingness to change. Where someone like me can contribute more, and which is what the next part of the presentation is about, what my model is about, is where there is some willingness. Well, hey, it's important. We know, we read Larry Fink, we are seeing the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, we are seeing all these things that's going on. We are losing to competition, so we must do sustainability. Yes, we get that. But then they lack in the ability. They lack in the ability to change. And why? The first thing I discovered there is that sustainability is often treated in these companies as a change management initiative. So it's change management. So we've got to do lean manufacturing, or we've got to do digitalization, or any of these other things. The problem is that sustainability is not a change management initiative. It deals with fundamental shifts in mindset and an alignment of values of the organization and the individual that no change management initiative actually speaks to. So they're kind of stuck there, and what happens as a result is that the costs of acting sustainably in an organization are very high and the benefits remain very low. So what I'm going to try and do in my model is I'm going to try and change that calculus so that the costs of acting sustainability become low and the benefits of acting sustainably become high. And what's an example of a benefit? I mean, you can forget getting money or being rewarded, which we will talk about a little bit later, incentives. But the biggest benefit of acting or encouraging people to act sustainably is to bridge this gap between the desire for meaning that employees have today, or citizens have today, individuals have today, and the ability to find it in their organization, in their work sphere. And what do I mean by that? One of the quotes I have from an employee is like, when I come to work, I feel like I have to check my morals at the door. Now think about that for a second. When I come to work, I feel like I have to check my morals at the door. So when I'm at home, I'm talking to my kids, I'm reading the newspaper, I know about climate change, I know about inequality, about poverty, about all these kinds of things that are happening in the world around us. When I come into work, it's profits, profits, profits. Now, what does profit mean for the person who's 5 or 6 tiers down or whatever from the CEO? Not a whole lot. But if that person could contribute in some way, meaningful way, to make the world a better place, to make the company a better place, then there would be this overlap between their desire for meaning and their ability to find it. And Daniel Pink, I don't know if any of you read this book called Drive. I would highly recommend it. It's a very, very good book. He says, in his observation, he says that people today are yearning to find a purpose at work that's kind of larger than the corporation and its profits. So the first thing, if one can increase benefits, I was just giving you an example of what I mean by increasing the benefits of acting sustainably, is actually psychological benefit. And people would be much better off. So today, employee engagement worldwide is 13%, 1-3, right? Twice the amount, 26% of the people in the workforce are actively disengaged, meaning they badmouth their company after work hours, right? And why is that? Because there is no meaning. You don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. And so this is one thing. So I'm going to work on that ability part, less on the willingness part, but more on the ability part to show you what can be done. So ownership, I hit on this idea of ownership when I was in a Unilever factory in the middle of nowhere in India. I had to travel by train for 8 hours from Mumbai, which you would have heard of, to get to this place. It was like 45 degrees Celsius that day. But I go to this place, and I don't think there is a whole lot of incentive for an entire factory to dress up and behave nicely just because some itty-bitty professor has come from somewhere to kind of look at them. But I was amazed when I visited that factory, and more so when I visited the community, the villages around the factory, to see the kind of work that they had done. And then I realized that what they have, each employee had this sense of ownership, that this is my problem. It's not somebody else's problem. I will do what I can to help. And I've seen that at several other organizations as well. So then I started wondering, okay, I know this word ownership. We love, intuitively we love this idea of ownership. Is there any literature on ownership? So I went and tried looking, and sure enough, there is quite a good literature, rich literature on this idea of psychological ownership in organizational behavior. And that refers to feelings of possessiveness and connection towards some kind of an appealing object. It could be a person, it could be a company, or even an idea. I own this idea, and it doesn't have to be legal. It's not legal ownership, but it's just psychologically I feel tied. And why does this happen? It happens because we are what we have. Research has established that ownership is part of the human condition, right? We are what we have. And in behavioral economics, we have this very interesting effect that's called the mere ownership effect. If you know about this, so if you are asked to pay a price to own to buy something, it says you buy it for $5 or whatever, that's your willingness to pay for the product, then you don't want to sell it for $5, then you want more money to part with it. So that's the mere ownership effect. Dick Taylor, recent Nobel Prize winning economist, he's done a lot of studies on that. So feelings of ownership are expressed in terms of this is mine, our. And then in consumer behavior, there is research on kind of how ownership is really an extension of the self. It's a part of who we are. And what this literature essentially pointed out to me or made me think about is it possible that we can impart this sense of ownership to employees, to our ecosystem, to stakeholders in our ecosystem, and ultimately, consumers and civil society and so on. Which I think is kind of, what I hope to do, or at least in part. So if you look at the literature, there are three basic motivations for ownership. Now, by the way, I did not put the sites just to keep the slides clean, but if anybody is interested, I'm more than happy to share a paper that comes along with this. So there are three basic motivations for ownership, right? So efficacy, which means that we want to feel competent. We want to feel that we can affect our environment in some way as human beings. By our actions. Okay? Then there is a motivation for identity. So we want to define ourselves in some way. There is always this quest, kind of who am I, and how do I describe myself to others. Right? So there's this express our identities to others. And then finally there's this sense of belonging. So this is called like going home. Like, so where is home? What is our home? So it's about personal meaning, kind of security and comfort in our surroundings. This is what and all of these compel us to own things, own ideas, own relationships, the whole gamut. And my interest here is to establish that sustainability is a prime candidate for this ownership. It's a prime candidate. Why? Because everybody can contribute meaningful solutions to the sustainability problem, from the mailroom to the boardroom, right? If you put off your light, you are doing something meaningful. Do not think for a second that you're not doing something meaningful. If you put off the tap when you're brushing your teeth, you're doing something meaningful. But people have to get that into their heads, and that's where the better companies have done a good job of imparting that sense of meaning. Clearly, sustainability affords you the opportunity to express your personal values. So remember, I talked about the divergence of values currently between what individuals think and do in their private lives and in their public lives. But now, hey, I'm actually working to make the world a better place. When you are able to kind of imbibe that and internalize that, that's a whole different sense of self-esteem and so on that you get. And and finally, in this context of belonging, there's a chance to find some meaning. Okay, what is this about? And as well, the sense of security that, okay, if I do something, then I'm somehow helping to guard against the risks that come with being completely unsustainable. At least I'm doing my part. And that is a sense of assurance that you get kind of, from acting in that arena. Now, each of these is linked to certain actions that the company, or certain hooks that the company can use to create this sense of ownership. And so it could be a sense of control that you give your stakeholders. You spur them on to do creative things, so you kind of encourage creativity. You afford or accord status and prestige to sustainability. I mean, that's, people feel, okay, this is something important to our organization. That's really cool. And you allow them to have a deep understanding of the subject. Okay, what is this? What is climate change? What is my role in dealing with CO2 emissions or whatever? And you allow them to invest themselves. So in ownership literature, it shows that when you invest yourself, so the person who actually paints a wall in his or her house, right, actually has a higher sense of ownership or more pride of ownership than someone who likely just brought in a painter and got it painted. And all of these studies have been done in the literature and shown. Now, these hooks are not tightly coupled with these. This is again, there should be arrows going everywhere, all over the place. But this is just, again, for expositional ease. But the point to note is that the companies that are doing really well in the sustainability area and where ownership exists are basically just playing with these things. They're playing with these concepts. And so the model that I will show you now essentially just plays on these concepts and say, okay, if you can give your employees and your stakeholders a chance to invest themselves in some sustainability related project, if you give it status and prestige, if you allow them to be creative, any combination of these kinds of things, then you have a higher chance of getting that sense of ownership that we are talking about, right? Getting bored? Yes, no? I don't know. Might as well check. I'm between you and dinner, right? All right. I lose sense of time when I speak. So 10 more minutes, I guess, right? So the model that I have is basically a three-phase model, right? The three phases: incubate, launch, and entrench. Right? And I will give you an analogy to the house ownership kind of issue. So, how many of you have a house or an apartment that you have bought? Several others are waiting, right? You're renting right now. So soon you will be in the position to want to buy a house. So when you want to buy a house, the first thing is, why should I buy a house? I mean, what's so compelling about buying a house right now? You have to answer that question, otherwise there's no house. Oh, maybe I'm going to get a kid soon, so we need more space. The second thing is, what kind of house am I going to buy? What's my budget? So you first got to contour the problem, and then you've got to make it into some kind of concrete goals. What is it that I'm going to do? Then the launch phase in the house example is like, okay, I mean, where's the money coming from? Who's going to give me the mortgage? And how am I going to repay it? All these kinds of things. And this is where I talk about two factors: entice and enable. And then in the final phase, entrench means to make routinize, to routinize something. Right? So that's about making the house a home. How do I make the house a home? And here I come up with kind of three main factors, which is kind of, called the demystify, enliven, expand. So these are the things I'm going to talk about. 1 minute on each factor. So incubate. And the first thing is to contour. So here the main question is, the companies must ask, why do we do what we do? Why do we do what we do? Do we sell electricity? Or do we help people keep warm or cool as they need to be? So I talked to someone in a consumer goods company whose job is basically to sell soap. But that soap is an antibacterial soap, and it can actually help save children's lives in developing countries, because hand washing is a chronic problem in those countries. Children die from lack of hand washing. Now, selling soap versus saving lives. Now, you might think this is a trivial difference, but actually it's not if you put on that person's hat when you go out in the morning and you go out selling. Salespeople have told me that it's a significantly different idea when you go out thinking that I'm selling lives. It's the same thing. I'm keeping people warm, I'm keeping people cool, vis-a-vis, well, I'm selling electricity. So this question of why do we do what we do has to be answered by every company. And why should we take ownership of sustainability now? I mean, so that, and there's compelling statistics that the company can look into. BASF, we heard from them earlier today. We create chemistry for a sustainable future. Now, you can think that BASF, is this gentleman still here? Has he gone? BASF, anybody here? You can think that chemicals are ugly, right? I mean, they are ugly. I mean, they do lots of bad things. but you will be amazed at how much hard work BASF has done over the last decade, just perhaps to make sure that they survive 100 years from today, that they don't want to be seen as the bad guy. They want to escape regulatory attention, NGO attention, this, that, whatever. They want to be sustainable. So these questions have to be answered by the leadership, and that basically makes work meaningful, and it gives status to sustainability. So I will always talk about point to the hooks, basically the conceptual hooks that I talked about before, but essentially make this kind of more of a story. So the first thing is you outline what is our purpose, because a chemical company's purpose is different from a financial services company's purpose, right? So you have to answer what that purpose is. And in this context, I just wanted to share with you this one video, a clip, a very short clip. So I was fortunate to interview Paul Polman, the CEO of Unilever. And Unilever is a fanatic about this idea of purpose. And this antibacterial soap story that I told you was actually from a person at Unilever. And here I ask him what role purpose plays in this whole sustainability journey. And let's take a listen to what he says.
Well, it's totally driven by purpose, because it starts on a macro level with the overall firm belief that you are here to serve society, that you're not here for yourself or your shareholders. So the first thing I made very clear is that we focus on the citizens out there. We call them our consumers at that time still, but the citizens out there and our multiple stakeholders, our employees. And only by doing that well would our shareholders benefit. And we still have that in that credo that we created, which is the compass. We still have that ingrained as the first sentence on that. And that is now, after 6 years, well ingrained in the company. So your deeper purpose starts with serving others, working for the common good. And the more you give, it's the same with your families, your marriage, your friendships. The more you give, the better environment you create to receive as well and be successful. Firmly established, but then also whatever you do, firmly linked to our business model and the areas that we are in. So the second thing that purpose comes in is obviously is in our brands itself. So which is really the tool that we express our connection with the world, if you want to put it that way. So we have worked tremendously hard in each of the brands where we have a brand key that historically has been about performance. You might be there for hand washing in less time. We've now put a social purpose in all of it, which, for example, for Lifebuoy, for hand washing, is help a child reach the age of 5.
So he says a few interesting things in here. He says that the purpose of business is really to serve the common good, and only by doing that well are we going to make money. I mean, this is not a view that is shared widely in the industry, which is why Paul Polman is also the chairperson of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and many other kind of forums. So he thinks differently. But then he also said that the brands are the way they communicate. So it's linked to the business model. That was the main thing to note from here. It's not, this purpose is not just kind of some airy-fairy, fluffy stuff that's floating around there. It's driven through the organization. So leaders have to drive this sense of purpose to the organization, and the brand makes a very good case. Everybody can relate to the brand, which is why the salesperson said, I would rather save lives than sell soap, or that's what I would like to think myself as. So purpose is job one. So the second thing is to make that purpose concrete. I mean, otherwise it will always be this airy-fairy thing. How do you concretize your goals? I mean, listen to what this person says from Allianz. If you don't focus on anything in a way, you do nothing. So we said, yes, we have to be concerned about everything, but let us have 3 areas of focus. That's very important. A financial services company is very different from a travel agency or from a cement company or whatever. So what are your goals? Is CO2 the most important thing for you? Is it water? Is it biodiversity? Is it human rights? Right? So this is where companies have to let the outside in. And I was speaking to Nestle, an officer there, and he said, 5 years ago, nobody was talking about sustainable sourcing of food materials. But today, that conversation is an everyday conversation. Where does your things come from? Raw materials come from. So you have to kind of set your expectations in line with what the outside world is thinking. You have to inspect the entire value chain. We heard a lot about materiality today, so I won't dwell on that. But you have to come up with very, very concrete goals in the organization that's then cascaded kind of throughout. Just saying that we want to be a good citizen, you're going to fail quite miserably. Right. So after we have these clear-cut goals is the point where we actually want to launch this thing to the organization. Now, how many employees did SAP say they had? Let's see who was listening. 90,000. Right. Very good. Extra sect for you. So how do you get 90,000 people? Or in the case of Unilever, 175,000 people or whatever it is, to buy into the idea that sustainability is something that I want to deal with in my life, particularly if I'm 55 years old and I've worked in the company for 30 years doing something in middle management and I know this is the end of the road for me. Why would I want to actually do something that makes more work for me? Right? The fat middle, we call that, right? So the fat middle of the organization. And here, companies that have done well have done amazing things. So what they do is they appeal to the head and the heart. So rational appeals, so the business case, you have to show the numbers. Like, look, this pays back. You're investing in a new server. I was at IBM, and they said, the sustainability department doesn't pay for anything. They just show the line managers that, look, if you buy this server, new server, it's going to pay back in dollar terms because then you won't be cooling and heating different parts of the building at the same time because that's what's going on in the old regime, right? So it's a clear calculation. That's the head. And the heart, of course, you know what the heart is. So you have to appeal to both. And the heart, and this is an interesting example here from Old Mutual, which is a financial services company. And this lady says, well, this business loves numbers. It loves data and matrices. And the big step for us has been that we are now winning people's hearts as well as their minds. So they had these people who were doing numbers the whole time. They had no clue how their work helps save people's lives in the community or helps people improve their livelihoods in the community. So what she did was she took these 40 people and took them to the field, right, and let them loose and said, okay, these are the kinds of people we are giving loans to. Why don't you talk to them, figure out how the bank has actually been able to help them. And this is what part of the leadership program was. And so these guys come back and say that, now I'm realizing that through what I do in my day job, I can change people's lives. And it has given them another lease on life. It makes them feel that they come to work and do more than just crunch numbers and spreadsheets. So getting people out into the field, having conversations at pubs. That's what I learned at Marks and Spencer's. So what do you do? Oh, we take people out to pubs in the evening and we talk to them. We say, don't you want your child to have a good future, this, that, and then they get the thing. So it's a multi-prong. It's hard work. It's real hard work, but people are doing it and companies are doing it. And that's how you get kind of everybody on board. And you have ambassadors. So the best companies have ambassadors at all levels. And these ambassadors work to spread the message kind of, to the employees. The example of Sony was that Sony, what they did was they asked their employees, how can we be a more sustainable company? Give us your ideas. And it was just a pilot program, 500 employees they chose. And they spent about $20 per employee to run this contest or do this program. And they saved, on average, $85 per employee on that $20 investment. So they saved like 102 tons of CO2, they saved like 36,000 gallons of water, they saved fuel, all this. The employees came up with the idea. And once you give them the chance to be creative and invest themselves, ownership. That's when ownership kicks in. Well, hey, I can do something about this, that's a good thing. So recognition, status-based incentives, so this is where there's a whole area of time variable compensation to employees' variable compensation to sustainability, and that's proven effective as well in cases. Now, okay, so I've sold you on the idea. I've sold you on the idea that sustainability is good, but now what? I don't know how to incorporate sustainability criteria into my finance model, or I don't know how to do an eco-efficiency analysis, or I don't know how to put sustainability into my sourcing raw materials as a criteria. So this step I call enable, and this is kind of the heart of the system. This is the heart of the engine. You have got to invest, or companies have to invest in systems, structures, trainings, so that people know they have competence. Unless you have competence on your side, it will always be too difficult, too costly. So competence lowers the cost of acting sustainably, right? And when you put systems in place, so Marks and Spencer's procures over 1 million items every day. How would they put sustainability criteria into it if it was not part of the system? BASF has a product line of 60,000, same thing. So here's a quote from the chief marketing officer of Unilever. Is like, don't create a little department in the corner, mainstream into all countries, all brands, all divisions. The sooner you have an exception, everyone thinks they're the exception. Isn't that amazing? So don't even have one exception, right? And so make sustainability everyone's job. Easier said than done. But again, this is something that we have got to try and do. So at this stage, then, we want to move to the next phase, which is this thing called entrench, or to make routinize. How do we make it routine? So for us, it's routine. It's routine to put off the tap, right, when we brush our teeth. Right? I imagine, I'll assume. But it may not be routine to put the towel back on that rack after seeing the message from the hotel about how many towels are being washed every day, etc. Some of us do it, some of us don't, whatever, But how do we routinize? How do we routinize all these kinds of things, right? How do we routinize reading labels? So, point here is that you need to demystify people's contributions. If they are doing something, tell them what they have done. And this is the area of measurement, which is near and dear to all our hearts. But you can measure both direct effects. So many companies are quite ad hoc. You only saw the best companies in this conference. There are many companies who don't know how much CO2 they're reducing, if they're reducing at all, or how much water they use, or how much waste they send to the landfill. Thousands and thousands of companies out there who have no clue in any of this regard still, right? So, but if you make these goals, these targets and goals transparent to the stakeholder, that gives us that sense of ownership. Hey, my department achieved our target. So when I was again in this Unilever factory in India, they had these boards on which they would write down what their CO2 reduction was and how it compared to other factories. So they have like contests across factories in terms of who's doing the best. I mean, that's kind of cool to keep you energized. And if you can demonstrate the connection between sustainable actions and the financial gain that you get, even better. SAP is the one, he's going to do the last part of the talk. And financial gains. SAP talked about that they get 60 million euros from increased employee engagement, right? So this gives employees a deeper understanding of their contribution, right? And that's how leads to the sense of ownership. The sixth step is, or the second step within Entrench is, I call it enliven, which is to keep fresh. So something like sustainability, oftentimes I hear, well, this is another flavor of the month. It'll go away. I mean, we just need to keep our head down. It'll go away. But no, I mean, it's gonna stay and it's gonna be part of your life. And there I can think of kind of co-creation. That's the greatest opportunity for self-investment. And there is no better way to have a sense of ownership than self-investment. When we invest in something, we have a sense of ownership. Think about your research projects. You invest all that time. So, okay, no, I have some ownership on this, right? Communication. So there are companies where you put on your laptop anytime, the first thing will be a pop-up that will tell you what the CO2 emissions of the company are, how you are relative to your goals, and all these kinds of things, right? And my favorite one is celebration. So where you actually celebrate your successes and your failures. So there is this company called Enel in Italy. They have something called My Best Failure Award. So they reward people for failing because that encourages people to innovate, to take action. They realize that failure is not such a bad thing. So you have to keep it fresh. So the CEO of Coca-Cola Partners says about every 3 years, we've kind of come to the view we need a complete refresh of what it is. Sustainability might even, the meaning of it might have changed, how you're going to drive it might have changed. So keep it fresh. And the final thing, and one of the things that's most interesting to me, is that you expand this sense of ownership. So it's not me anymore. It's not my company even anymore. It's us as a collective. Because the commons problems, the wicked problems of the commons, like deforestation, no one company can address that. Right? So unless you shift the whole industry, you're only going to solve pockets of the problem. So that's why we have coalitions on like sustainable palm oil and so on. People today cringe. I've talked to so many companies that are completely, shocked to hear that you can actually talk to competitors and come up with joint solutions with competitors because they're still living kind of in the past where no, that's verboten. But you can contribute to these industry-wide coalitions, and there's a whole host of kind of things in relation to that where you should meet on neutral ground, and that's very helpful because otherwise nobody wants to talk to their competitor and so on. So academic institutions have actually emerged as a safe haven for competitors to come together and conduct this kind of sectoral business. And one of the big successes is actually this palm oil, because it was Nestle, Unilever, Coca-Cola, Colgate, Pepsi, all the big rivals came together and they said that by 2030, they had committed to kind of, ending deforestation because of palm oil procurement. So this is the stage where you don't just want your lawn to look good, you want your neighbor's lawn also to look good because that's what enhances the value of your entire neighborhood. I don't know if any of you have gotten dirty glances from your neighbor because you're not cutting your grass, but it does happen. Right. So that's basically the model, but what do you get from this? I mean, that's the important thing, right? What are the outcomes? And there are many outcomes, but I'll just point out to two. One is this idea of this employee engagement thing, right? So an employee engagement has been linked to profitability. You heard from, you don't have to take my word, you heard SAP today saying how it's linked to profitability. So, okay, one of the reasons I've stayed at my company for all these years is that I've enjoyed working with the people and I feel they're fundamentally trying to do the right thing. So it's been linked to employee productivity as well. Our research has shown that too. But what's more interesting is the meaning side of things, is this outcome called transcendence. Transcendence is this quest for meaning. I'm trying to find meaning in my life. And I was interviewing this person in this consumer products company, and he's talking about a colleague whose job was just to stand on the shop floor and make sure that the soap goes down in a straight in the line as it is going to the next phase. So he's talking about his colleague, and he says his job was watching the soap go down the line to make sure that it was straight. We did a clip of him being interviewed around what his job is about, and he spontaneously said, my job is about saving millions of lives around the world. So he's internalized, even though all he's doing is keeping the soap straight, he's internalized that he's actually saving lives. And that makes a big difference to us as human beings. And the companies that are doing the best job, again, in this regard, have imparted this sense of purpose. Again, coming back to purpose, has imparted this sense of purpose to their employees. And that also makes for higher productivity and consequently higher profitability and a better society, not to forget that part. So this is the whole model in its entirety. I just thought I would kind of break it up for you and present it in different parts. I call it the path to sustainability ownership, and I'm hanging my hat on this ownership idea. So there are tons and tons of empirical questions, but I will not bore you with these. But I expect, if anybody is interested in digging deeper into each of these parts, has empirical questions associated with them that you can break up into your mediated moderation models and all of that. I mean, kind of what levers work best under what conditions, and all these other kinds of questions can be answered. So there's plenty of empirical questions. If you're interested, there is a very, very short article, and this was the original title of the talk, I guess. This is what I had sent Laura as a title or something similar about like this. But this was published in the Harvard Business Review in February 2018. So how to make sustainability every employee's responsibility. So this is like in brief, this entire model was presented in brief, kind of in this Harvard Business Review, in this Harvard Business Review article, if you're interested. So I think I have hugely overstayed my welcome. So I want to buy all of you a drink. Now please follow me to the bar, and each of you can get a glass of sect. Thank you for indulging me, and I'm more than happy to keep in touch via any medium that you care. Thank you very much.